You're watching Open Agenda. Here's our host, Michael Langford.
Welcome to Open Agenda. I'm Michael Langford, your host. In studio with me today is Jim Adkins from Ardella and Mike Goldberg from Del Mar, Maryland. Today we're going to be talking about legislation that there was a public hearing for legislation 2026-2 on March 17th in regards to developments in critical areas. Mike, could you tell us more about what a critical area even is?
The Critical Area Act is legislation passed in Maryland back in 1984, I believe it was. It essentially establishes a regulatory zone, a protected zone that lies within 1,000 feet of any of the high tide mark of any tidal waters. Okay, so anything within 1,000 feet is of the river's edge, essentially, or the bay's edge, or any of its tributaries, tidal tributaries, is the critical area. It limits, you're more limited as to what you can build, how much land can be disturbed, mitigation requirements to replace any disturbed, tidal wetlands. And the regulations become even more stringent when you're within what they call the 100-foot buffer zone. So that first 100 feet away from that river edge is regulated more strictly than going out a little bit further.
That makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like there's a lot of area here in Wycomico County that would fall within that critical area framework. There's a lot of tributaries here in Wycomico County. Jim, I would like to get your thoughts on this as you were at the meeting, but I'm going to bring in Joe White first as he spoke at the meeting and was there. Will you stick around?
Sounds good, yep.
All right, thank you. Stay tuned with us for our next segment. Hi, welcome back to Open Agenda. My name is Michael Langford. In studio with me today is Mike Goldberg of Del Mar, Maryland.
Hello, Michael.
And Joe White of Parsonsburg.
Thanks for having me on.
Today we're going to be discussing legislation 2026-2, is that correct?
That's right.
Which has to do with the ability to get development done within a critical bay area. Can you tell me more about this, Joe?
Yeah, in a critical area like a 100-foot buffer zone or a wetland area, there was a change. This was mandated from the state of Maryland that the county changed their code. But there were some options on there, particularly about how the appeals process happened, because we have a board of appeals through zoning. But this would have allowed for an administrative appeal. And so if you go back, on February 17th was the introduction of this bill at the county level.
We're here to introduce Legislative Bill 2026-02. It's an act to amend Chapter 125 of the Wycomico County Code to have a critical area resource protection. One of these mandates that come down from the state, so that the vast majority of this is not something the county has any discretion about. It's something mandated by the state.
It's Taylor here. If you just want to give an overview, I know we've done this before, but just I would just like, I don't think the council has any questions. We understand, as Mr. Benson said, we don't have a choice on this. But just one more time, if you could maybe to reiterate to the public how or what changes they may anticipate,
For the record, Andrew Illuminati, Department of Law.
Tracy Taylor, Planning Director for Wycomico County.
Colin Harrison, Environmental Planner for Wycomico County Planning and Zoning.
Great, thank you.
Now, we do have very little flexibility in what we can change in that. One of the things they did recommend at the commission level was an administrative variance process. So kind of fast tracking some things that can be handled within our department versus the public advertising for Board of Appeals.
And we did try to build some new items into the ordinance, but they pushed back on that. Almost everything that we attempted to put in, they said no.
And again, like I said, it came down from the state. They actually took out the entire part of the code and rewrote it to match what the state's mandating. And then on March 17th, they had a public hearing.
Jim Atkins, Wycomico County. Just a real quick mention about the Critical Area Commission. There is a recommendation for an administrative variance process, which is supposed to streamline and reduce the costs of the process. This would give the planning director the ability to grant a variance. Areas of concern about this process are, does this give the director power over an appeal without a public hearing? Although Article 125, Section 7, entitled Enforcement, subsection J, titled Appeals, addresses this, the question is, how is the public ever made aware of the variance, and will they be informed in a timely manner? Although we can't change the state laws, we should not hide the appeal process. Maybe it's not connected, but I find it very interesting that the state wants to mandate the amount of acreage to be used for solar farms. They want to allow poultry construction before there's a plan for the waste discharge from these buildings. And now they want to be in charge of the critical areas that they haven't protected before. The county continues, and rightfully so, to complain that the state is taking all their power from the county. Well, folks, now you know how the citizens of the county feel. Recent history shows up after the DAP tank and the biorefinery that it is as important that the public is kept informed when it comes to growth and development in the county. There's not much land in Wycomico County which doesn't impact critical areas. Let's make sure we preserve what we have. Thank you.
And they voted on it. It actually initially got tabled until some language was changed, and it came back later in the meeting, and they made some adjustments, which some folks in the community had asked for, including myself.
I do want to address the administrative variance section of the ordinance. I want to be completely transparent in that the administrative variance provision that we're proposing in this new update is an optional section of the critical area ordinance. We do not have to adopt. From the very beginning, I wasn't a fan, but I was won over eventually because we were allowed to craft and tailor the administrative variance process to what we felt comfortable with. I also had concerns, as has been expressed by some members of the public, about the Board of Appeals and usurping any authority of the Board of Appeals. I had concerns about any subsequent director may not necessarily look at an administrative variance the way that I would necessarily look at it. Cases where we're talking about a vacant parcel being developed with impacts to the 100-foot buffer, none of that is going to be approved administratively, and it's expressly prohibited in the regulation. So this is only for very minor adjustments, for grandfathering type situations or very minor disturbances. We were trying to find a way for it to be less costly and more streamlined for the applicant.
As Tracy said, she might not be the planning director forever. And I'm looking at 125-5, the planning director or designee shall review a permit license or other authorization for a development or redevelopment activity in the critical area for compliance with this critical area chapter prior to issues of that permit or license. That pretty much says that you all can do basically anything you want to, right? Isn't that? Whether it's minor or major.
Each of the different types of provisions within the administrative variance, whether it is a relocation of a dwelling or accessory structure, whether it's an addition to an existing primary structure, or whether it is a driveway location, patio location, each one of those is spelled out specifically within the administrative variance process, and under each type of development, it spells out specifically what our limitations are. Applicant can't meet those parameters, then it gets kicked into the Board of Appeals full variance process. So it's very, very restrictive. Each use is identified and each parameter is explained.
I go back and think about the dog kennel issue we went through. We kind of jumped on that right away without whole lot of oversight, and I understand with what you're saying, but anytime we take any transparency out of our government operation where people don't have a chance to express their views concerns me. What option does a person have if you streamline this and you approve something administratively, and then say a neighbor finds out about it later and is not happy with it after it's taken place? What option does this neighbor have after, say, this person goes in and puts a building up or puts a driveway in? What option do they have then?
That's a very good question, and I see your point. obviously they have an appeal process, but then the question becomes, how do they know when the appeal process starts if they're not a part of the original decision when the clock starts ticking? I would say that what I would offer is we could easily add into the administrative process as an amendment. We could easily say that adjoining property owners will be notified by mail of the application for an administrative variance as a part of the recommendation process. We can add that in simply, and then adjacent property owners are notified. And I would offer that as an amendment if you decided to proceed with the ordinance as written.
They would have a certain amount of time to contact the administration.
They would be notified of the administrative variance process, and they would have a certain amount of time to contact the planning and zoning department, yes.
And then it would still be up to the planning and zoning director or your designated person to make the decision whether they want to pay attention to what this person's saying or not.
Yes, and I can't speak for future directors. I know in my case, if I received input from an adjacent property owner that there was concern, then we would bump it to the Board of Appeals.
Additionally, it could be amended so that all adjoining property owners are notified of the decision of the administrative variance.
We could do
That way, that then triggers the 30-day appeal process.
That would work as well, yes.
And so it's both sides. It's before staff considers the variance, and then after staff has considered the variance, the public's notified.
And then they have an opportunity to appeal within the 30 days.
I think that's a good compromise, and I would be willing to make a motion to amend. But, Mr. Chairman, I move to amend the proposal, the main proposal, to include some verbiage to capture public notification by planning and zoning on cases.
Okay. Motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Second.
Don't you need the specific language to input into in order to do that motion to amend?
I was looking to have either Mr. Illuminati or...
I understand that, but that's not how...
Yeah.
In fairness to Mr. Illuminati, I don't know that he's got it. Could maybe move the vote on this till later in the meeting and gave him a half an hour. Could he come up with a language, or would it be better to come back the next meeting and do it?
I think we can put that together in the next, if this was tabled to right before public comment, we should be able to put something together with this specific section, subsection, verbiage.
Yeah. Okay. I'll entertain a motion to take Legislative Bill 2026-02, put it back on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you all. That was quick work.
Yes, thank you. Staff did a wonderful job, and we were able to put this together. 7 will now say decisions on administrative variances by the planning director may be appealed within 30 days to the Board of Appeals.
Motion to approve Legislative Bill 2026-02 as amended.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
How are you feeling about this, Mike?
Well, I have some mixed feelings about it. I think it can be helpful to allow for administrative variances to a limited extent, insofar as it will help to expedite the approval process. Under the current system, it can take up to 6 months. 4 to 6 months, I think, is fairly typical to get variances within the critical area approved. This legislation, and this is an optional portion of this legislation. This is not required by Annapolis, but gives the county the ability to allow the planning and zoning director to grant unilaterally a variance, but only for limited items of work. For instance, if you have a home that was existing before the critical areas law was passed, I believe it was 1984, you're grandfathered in. I mean, you can do certain things without having to go through a convoluted process. Or if you're just doing a minor improvement where there's not a great deal of disturbance, you're not disturbing a wetland, or you're not clearing a large amount of space, for instance, putting in a patio or a driveway, it would allow the administrator to grant that variance under those circumstances. The problem is don't adjacent landowners have a right to know what's going on?
and possibly appeal if it's something that could be a detriment to another property owner. And I want to say, I mean, Tracy Taylor, who's in charge of planning and zoning now, she's wonderful. I would totally trust that she would be able to administer these administrative appeals very, very well. But we don't know 10 or 20 years from now, after she's retired or moves on to another position, that the next person would do it. And more importantly, with the old Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals, there would have been a notice that someone had made the application, 30 days. Then there would have been a hearing. And then there also would have been an opportunity to appeal. So say your neighbor wanted to put a new driveway in a critical area, but that might back up water onto your property. With this straight administrative appeal, as they initially introduced it, because like I said, they changed it later, had they just pushed that through, as the state was recommending, then you may not even know as a homeowner until it's already done. And it's approved. There's really nothing that you can do at that point except live with it. I was very impressed with the transparent nature of all of this. I spoke at the February 17th meeting, and I brought up my concern.
Good morning. Joe White, Wycomico County. You just watched the 2026-02 bill introduction. I just want to put a couple thoughts in your head, a couple guardrails, a couple words, slogans that were mentioned in there, and not in malice, not at all. But this is so much easier. This is faster. This will cost less money. I'm not sure that that's exactly what these new regulations are. It should not be administrative. So please don't give up our rights.
And then Tracy Taylor mentioned at the March 17th meeting that she heard the public comments. They made some recommended changes. They brought that to the county council. They actually left to type it in, and then they came back to get it approved, which now will allow for there to be a 30-day notice before an administrative appeal is heard, so to speak. It's not that it's heard, but just decided. And then even after that, there would be another letter sent out, and there would be someone in a neighboring house wanted to appeal that, then there would be that 30 days that they would have a chance to actually make that appeal, which I think is a great compromise.
It's absolutely critical, because if the administrator, if the director of planning and zoning does make an error, then there's no recourse. This provides, the way this bill was amended does provide for the necessary recourse.
Mm. You know, we saw the county council make a huge mistake about a year ago with some kennel legislation, right? I was at those meetings. Initially, they were going to have a 250-foot setback on all sides of the property. At the very last minute, a council member, who's actually not even on the council anymore, made a motion for an amendment to move it to 1,000 feet. The problem is you're talking about square feet, not linear feet at that point.
Not a straight line.
So you would have needed 64 acres just to have a dog kennel in the very center of that. So if you don't have that type of appeals process, even something, I mean, it wasn't intentional. It was just someone who's not that great at math, you know? And so when you make that, then the public doesn't have a chance to weigh in. And I think that this could happen on an administrative side where it's not intentional. No one's evil out there. But once again, we're seeing Annapolis try to dictate to us our code. And we have to be able to protect our interest here locally. And you're only going to be able to do that with your local government. And this is, I think, a key point of that.
No, I think that the idea that, you know, there's state legislation that comes down, but when it comes to like Critical Areas Commission, which is a state commission, right? This seems like that even circumvents them as far as like reviewing, because there's a process like when you want to develop something large within a critical area. Currently, it's like you not only have to go through Planning Commission and the Board of Appeals in your local, but you also are supposed to go to the State Critical Area Commission. So to me, a lot of why those different boards and committees and commissions exist is like that's part of people having a say here who aren't necessarily a member of the government. You know, the people who are on the Planning Commission, not in the Planning and Zoning Department for the city, but the people actually on the commission, those people are regular citizens, and that's us having a say too. There needs to be an appeal process for the neighbor, but there also needs to be a way that people who live here have a say about what it looks like in 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, if you're say you're in Annapolis and your goal is to come up with some sort of law that works across this state, and this is America in miniature, how do you create a set of standards that works on the Eastern Shore where we have a lot of tidal wetlands, but also works in the mountains of Allegheny and Garrett counties,
right,
let alone Baltimore, Howard County, Montgomery County, which are vastly different and very urban. The key here is that we're a unique area, and we should have the ability to form our own governance, and part of that is through the management of these critical areas. I'm all for property rights owners. If you're allowed to do it on your property, I want you to be able to do it. But at the same time, what you do on your property can't impact your neighbor's property. And backing up water or cutting off access point to maybe a hunting property, that wouldn't be okay, and it should stay local.
Unfortunately, Annapolis is becoming increasingly intrusive in many different areas on local control. That really concerns me. We need to make every reasonable effort to maintain control, to be able to direct our to self-determine how we are going to do things on the Eastern Shore, where we are going to go.
No, I agree, because why else would people come here? If it's the same as Bethesda, Frederick, Baltimore, why would they come live here in the first place?
Yeah.
Right?
And why don't we just live there if that's what we want?
I could write a book on why I don't live there.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important that people that here have a say. I mean, I just think that's and it's kind of odd that the current administration are supposedly Democrats, but this is the part where we talk about a uniparty and money, because it seems to me that lessening that process seems like a subtle reach to extend development down the line, and it
possibly could be
potentially.
Yeah.
And it's just I just don't think that the politicians have our best interest at heart. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming in to discuss this with me today, and stay tuned for our next segment. Welcome back. I'm Michael Langford, back to discuss this critical areas with legislation 2026-2 is, again, Mr. Mike Goldberg from Delmar and Jim Atkins from Ardella Springs.
Good morning. Morning.
All right, Jim. So you were just listening to our conversation that we just had. Tell us where you fit in as somebody who's, lifelong resident living in these areas.
Well, the thing that concerned me, and I spoke about this at the March 17th council meeting, which hopefully caused some of the discussion to go on that morning and some of the changes being made, that it's hard to find land on the Eastern Shore that's not part of critical land, with all the rivers, creeks, and everything we've got around here. And why the county would be willing to even consider giving authority up to the state. I mean, this legislation, the state is mandating that it happen. The county can't do anything about that, but the county does not have to give up the appeal process and let the public know what's going on. And that was what I spoke on. And they did. Councilman Holloway was very involved in that also, and Tracy Taylor. Any dealings I've ever had with Tracy and planning and zoning, or any meetings I've been in, whether there's a lady with knowledge and common sense. But as she said in the council meeting, I won't always be here. You don't know who may come after me and what they want to do, which is the whole reason why several people were pushing for this adoption of this change in the legislation, because we know what we have now, we trust what we have now, but we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about this governance is what's it going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And I think certain people, that maybe is not part of common sense, right? It's good to have a good person in today, but I think what's it going to look like in 10, 20 years when you're making these changes is a real concern.
Any type of legislation has to be structured for the office, not the individual who holds that office.
See, the big thing with this is that was concerning to everybody was that it took the appeal process away from the people. The people got no notification that certain construction was going to be done. And once it was approved, you had 30 days to appeal it. But if you went in and presented it and got a variance approved, I then had 30 days to appeal it. But if you never started your work on that variance, on that project, I would never know that you had gotten an approval. So you could sit home for 30 days and be quiet and then start the construction, and then I find out about it and I want to appeal, but it's already been 30 days. I mean, there was no information, no notice given to the public. And it was originally based on, which I can appreciate, streamlining this so it doesn't take 4 to 6 months to get an approval. And they also said, well, we don't have to post it in the paper, so we're saving money and we're doing that. And I can go along with all of it. That's good. But the public and the people have to be informed. And one of the compromises that Councilman Holloway got involved in that is that all adjacent landowners to where the project was going to be put would receive notification from the county. So it wouldn't be that I didn't see it in the paper. They would get notification from the county that there was a project. There was an application, and then they would get another letter saying what the outcome of the application was, which would then allow them 30 days to appeal. So, I mean, that was the big compromise that everybody walked away happy about.
There's few people in this county who are more knowledgeable than you, quite frankly, from what I've seen on issues like this. Are you comfortable with this amended legislation that does provide for the appeal process after an administrative variance is granted?
Yeah, actually, with the way that they, again, stated they would notify all adjacent property owners that a application had been put in, and that they would again notify them of the decision that was made by planning and zoning, so that things could do.
And when it comes to critical area, most adjacent landowners aren't really going to be affected by anything. No. It's not like it's going to change the direction of stormwater flow necessarily that might flood an adjacent property. This is this is more of an environmental issue that, frankly, in my opinion, most people aren't really going to be concerned about. But to me, though, what's critical here is that there is a right. The public does have a right to know, and the public does have to have some kind of an off-ramp, a method of appealing in the event that there is a legitimate concern.
Yeah, and I think that was very impressive was that the fact that the council brought this up, Ms. Taylor and Mr. Illuminati, left the room, went out in the hallway, worked up new language for the legislation, came back in a half an hour later, presented it, and everybody was happy with it. It wasn't delayed. It was the example of government and people working together, and they made it happen that day.
It may never happen again.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing that that we people might feel we harp on this show, but it's really about that process, right? And part of this aspect of circumventing like the Board of Appeals or a planning commission in order to make an administrative decision, that makes sense in some cases, maybe limited. Again, something small like a shed, I get. But there's this process like what you just described where they brought something forward. It wasn't quite right. There was public input. They amended it. We need that process.
Yes.
The Board of Appeals is part of that process, and the people who live here that both serve on the board and people getting to be able to have a say at those board meetings is how we ensure like an integrity of an outcome that the people that live here are happy with.
Well, I would say that example the other day was one of the few times that you can say there was transparency. Everybody talks about transparency. The council talks about it. The executive talks about it. and there's no transparency. There's always a curtain up. Nobody knows what's going on, but that was transparent that day.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in and discuss this with me today.
Pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into Open Agenda. Stick with us for another episode coming later this week.